like you got some very creative stuff on there. And one thing in particular that I saw on there, I kind of wanted to kind of ask you about, which was, I guess, that whole couples during quarantine and how that equals to like more sex to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to kind of ask you, like, how did you come up with it, and what was the basic premise of it?
So, at the beginning of quarantine, after you get over like, hey, things are changing rapidly, there was like this wave of how to be productive, how to use your time in ways to, write a book and, start that business you've been thinking about. And, oh, we're a couple, we have more time to spend together. And I think where I was coming from was more so about that sense of feeling pressured to do these things when you might still be with depression and anxiety and uncertainty and loss in finances because of cutbacks at your place of employment, whatever the case is. And so I was kind of coming from the perspective of, but what if this time doesn't lead to more sex, right?
Yeah.
Because what if we had struggles in our relationship and now we're spending more time together and we're not communicating about some of the things that are coming up? Then it's going to lead to maybe feeling more disconnected. It may lead to feeling like, who is this person? Is this the person that is the one I was partnered with or married to all those years ago? So I think it created more silence to kind of decipher in the relationship. And so, yeah, I was seeing a lot of posts about like all the kinky things you can do and ways to spice up your relationship. And I was just like, but what if they already mad at each other? What if their relationship was already, on some thin ice?
Yeah.
Those articles aren't for them. So I just wanted to come from that perspective and offer a few suggestions and ideas. And also just because, I'm a sex, relationship, and trauma therapist and working with clients and specifically couples, people always want to know, how often are we supposed to have sex? Yeah. And really, it's like, is something wrong with me or us? Are we doing this enough? And so I just wanted to kind of just put that out there that it comes up all the time. Are we normal? Are we doing this enough? Is our relationship on the rocks because we are having too little sex?
Yeah. And I guess once people start really like embracing that, what you wrote, that blog and stuff like that, did people have questions after that? Like, did they come up to you and say, okay, this was like really informative, or like, what was the feedback on it?
Yeah, I actually had folks saying things like, this was really validating because I found myself in that situation where we were living together and we started having less sex, and we were really questioning what was going on. Were we losing attraction and desire for one another? Was it something else? And so to kind of give people that language to know that this can happen, you're not alone, was affirming in that sense, but also that there's something you can do about it. And the biggest thing that typically gets in the way, and this, is communication.
Yeah.
We are not talking. Oftentimes, we're just hoping. We're just hoping that things will get better. Oh, just give it a couple of days, give it a couple of weeks, and it's just going to get back on track. And the other partner can be thinking the same thing, or there could be something else going on and you're not checking in with one another. So I just did a talk, like a live with someone like last week. And they were just asking for like all the tips and tricks and things that you can do. And I was like, my first one is always going to be communication, because I can give you all the tools and tips in the world, but that doesn't mean it's going to be helpful for you or your partner's body, right? They may have some triggers, they may have some experiences that they really enjoyed that I didn't mention. And so I always say, I don't know your partner better than they know themselves. You have to talk to them. So I can give you a little toolbox and you can pull out some different things and say, hey, let's try this, let's talk about this. But we have to have these conversations together.
Yeah. So I'm guessing like some of the people that you do talk to from time to time, when lack of sex is their issue, their main issue in their relationship, is like, first off, do you just tell them, or how do you ask them how they're communicating in the relationship, and then you just kind of expand from there?
Absolutely. Like, first, I just want to know what their perspective is. So when I'm seeing couples, we do like a couple session, we do 2 individual sessions, and we do another one to kind of talk about where we're going to go, what are our ideas for working together. But when I am talking with them individually, I'm asking them, so tell me from your perspective, why are we here? What are we working on?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's kind of close. Sometimes it's two completely different things.
Yeah.
So in terms of that communication, it's just trying to figure out what does each person experiencing? What are they witnessing? Right. And then also, where do they want to go? Where are they hoping the work takes them? So that's the first piece. Yes, communication, but is what has that communication looked like so far? And what are you all acknowledging or not acknowledging about what's happening?
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess once you do that, does that like open up a whole different, I guess, more possibilities for them to kind of bridge that gap between, I guess, that intimacy portion of their relationship? Does that kind of help them kind of explore different options?
Yeah, sometimes it can serve to like lower that wall and create space for more vulnerability. I
Yeah.
think when we're talking about communication, specifically about sex, there's so much concern. There's that fear of potential rejection,
Yeah.
hearing something that you like. We don't ask some questions sometimes because we do not want a certain response.
Yeah.
And so I tell my clients, I say, hey, we are writing this book of our relationship, of love, of whatever, together, right? So you have to check in with your co-author. Don't just go off on a tangent and start writing this chapter and making all these connections without checking in with them, because oftentimes, I'll have a situation where I thought they were mad at me because, they came home and they slammed the door and they didn't speak to me. And now they have a cold shoulder and the other person doesn't want to talk. And then you find out what happened. It's like, oh, I just, someone cut me off and, almost, I had to swerve to avoid hitting something. And then I was carrying that energy to the room. And so when I got home, I just slammed the door.
Yeah.
It wasn't about them. Right. Yeah. And so it is like leading with curiosity, taking the time to slow down and to just increase the opportunity for perspective, and then to talk to your partner about these things instead of jumping to conclusions and then treating those conclusions as if they're facts, when in actuality we could be a little off base.
Yeah. So that's more of just kind of encouraging an open dialogue even when it comes to like sex, like just having an open dialogue.
Everything with everybody, because honestly, it's a skill that is not well taught or understood. So, we get to the point and we're in relationships and we're supposed to magically have these skills of communication, when as a kid we might have been in a family that was like, you speak when you're spoken to, mind your business, grown folks are talking, right? So there's all these different ways that we might experience community and socialization that may not be prepping us for conversations with other people, not just in romance, but with our bosses and our friendships, right? And all of these different areas where we are interacting with one another, we do not have the skills all the time. So that's why I think it's important that we are noticing these gaps, noticing these areas for improvement, so that we can start teaching people younger and younger, right? How do we honor boundaries with kiddos? How do we teach them about consent? So that way, I don't know if you've heard the saying, but it's like raise kids so they don't have to heal from their childhood as adults.
Yeah, I think yeah.
So I'm all about that. Okay. As a healing therapist, as someone who works with a lot of trauma, I'm all about how do we, work with you on healing what you've been through, but how do we also work with parents and their children so that way we don't have so many things to repair in their adulthood.
Yeah. So even with, I guess, your vast experience, the clients that come to you, have you like really coached some clients through like those difficult parts, not just lack of sex, but like past trauma when it comes to like sexual abuse, right? What's that process look like when you have like two clients, like a couple that come to you, and one of those individuals has had a history with like the sexual abuse part?
So first, just understanding what has been the impact of that unwanted sexual experience, right? And so sometimes we may have like a very black or white idea of what it means to be a survivor. So you have this this stereotype that they're going to be prude and timid around sex and sexuality, and you have ones who are going to be hypersexual and they're always, sex, party, and drugs type of thing. And so first we kind of got to get out that mindset that it's one or the other, right? And there's so many ways to be impacted by sexual trauma. And so one, getting a clear idea of how is it showing up in the relationship, right? Is there conflicted feelings around trust, self-trust, and trust of the other person? Has it impacted self-worth and self-esteem? Is there fear or disconnection with intimacy, not just sexual? What is their relationship with the word pleasure and intimacy? Because when I say it in my world, it's not just sex, but oftentimes when I say, oh, tell me about intimacy in your relationship, instantly, oh, we're not having sex, or this is our sex life. I didn't ask just about sex, right? Yeah. And so trying to figure out what their relationship with certain words are. Is there any presence of guilt or self-blame? And has that carried into the relationship about feeling guilty or blaming yourself because you're not having sex in your current relationship and feeling it's all your fault, right? Yeah. If there are other behavioral and emotional impacts like just depression, anxiety, avoidance, acting out. So one, just kind of slowing down and seeing what are the concerns? How's it showing up in a relationship? And then that's how we can address that, because the other partner needs to be aware, right? Because not everyone discloses traumatic history like that. Yeah. And so sometimes I have worked with clients where they had an experience and they were just trying to figure out how to disclose that with their partner in a safe space in a way that they could kind of lay that burden and that shame to the side and say, this is an experience I've had, and this seems to be putting up some of a barrier in our connection, and I want to work on it. Yeah. So I guess once that is known to a certain extent, that's more of, I guess, the two individuals supporting each other through that process to a certain extent. Absolutely. Absolutely. Any concern, any struggle, any problem in a relationship is in the relationship, right? It's not just my problem. It's not just your problem, right? It's me and you together trying to figure out the best way to approach this thing. Yeah. That's the best way to approach it, because sometimes, even if it is not even, say it's not related to sexual trauma, but it could just be one person looking at the other person as broken, right? As, because this happened to you, we are experiencing this, and it's your fault, right? You need to go to therapy. You need to get fixed. Let's kind of silence some of that really damaging language and look at it as we are a team going through this. It's impacting both of us. And what can we do to address it together? Yeah. And I think it's a lot of that is just kind of being comfortable with the word sex. Because a lot of times when people hear that word, people either cringe or they either smile. Or either way, right? Yeah, either way. But a lot of times, what I've seen is, like, even from a couple's dynamic, either one individual or the other is not open to just talking about that portion, and be like a little bit of like just being uncomfortable, like that word is like taboo, or it's just maybe insecurity or whatever that looks like. I think that, like, when people, I guess, embrace the idea that when you're with someone, like a couple or marriage or whatever, if you embrace that, because that's part of the relationship, because you have your emotional and then you have your physical. So to me, I think that once people embrace it, I think it's a lot better, right? Absolutely. I think there's so many components, right? So there's emotional, physical, there's mental, there's social. Yeah. Right. There's physiological and biological, right? Our body keeps track with a lot of our experiences. So even mentally, we can say, during sex, I find myself zoning out a lot, and I'm thinking about other things, and I'm not present in the moment. And my body is not doing the things that I think or I want it to be doing during a sexual encounter. And there's so many factors that might be influencing it. So if it's a discomfort with saying the word sex, if it's a discomfort with having sex with the lights on, if there's a discomfort with being touched in certain areas,
Yeah.
There is a way to try to start having these conversations. And it may not be we're talking about sex off the bat, right? Maybe we're talking about touch, right? Maybe we're talking about intimacy and feeling open and able to have intimate and vulnerable conversations with one another.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Yeah. So even with that, like when I guess two individuals they come to you and they talk about infidelity.
mm,
And when infidelity happens, it's kind of like it can happen in one or two ways, which is you can, emotionally cheat on someone or you can physically cheat on someone.
mm-hmm.
So how do you bridge that particular gap with, I guess, with a couple that comes to you and they're trying to rebuild what they had to a certain extent?
I just wanted to add something there because I also think there are a lot of different ways to
Yeah.
experience infidelity. So there could be financial infidelity, right? And so the first thing is one, reducing the impact of the affair, of the infidelity, right?
Yeah.
So in that moment, we might feel like, you know what, burn everything down. I'm thinking of wait and exhale. Like there's so many things where it's like you're making these big rash decisions, filing for divorce, taking the kids away, going up to people's jobs, whatever the case is. Like try to slow down and not make any big rash decisions. And also be realistic about the timeline of healing and reconciliation, because sometimes people get to therapy and they're just expecting like, okay, about six sessions, we want to be good, right? Mm-mm.
Yeah.
It's going to take time because there's a cycle. There's a cycle of loss. There's a cycle of grief, right? There's so many things that we are experiencing, not only in our mind, but in our body, that we have to slow down. So really reducing the impact of the affair in terms of any behaviors that you do after you find out that might add some complexity to the relationship when you're trying to either reconcile or get a divorce, whatever you're trying to do. But something that I see often is rushed past that does a lot of harm is not acknowledging the pain of the affair, right? Right. But what the person really needs to know and witness is that you truly see how hurt they are, right?
Yeah.
You also see what they're struggling with. You also see that they want you, but they feel maybe shamed or embarrassed by taking you back because of what maybe other people say or what that means about them. Oh, I took back a cheater. What does that mean? Right.
Yeah.
And so not acknowledging that, I see sometimes has been a speed bump or road bump, whatever, one of those words
Yeah.
in the process, because the other person feels like they really don't get it. So are you going to do it again? If you don't acknowledge how much pain I'm in, do you care about the pain that you've caused?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I see that sometimes is something that gets in the way. And we spend a lot of time on just making sure that not only it's understood, but the partner knows how to acknowledge it verbally and physically in the relationship.
So you also talk to them about because I know you mentioned previously time frame on like getting over something like that. And I guess I know that to a point you encourage people just to say, hey, there's not a time frame, right? Like there's not really a huge time frame of a person just kind of forgetting the action, right? So the person can kind of like, forget to a certain extent, or they have to forgive instead of forget. So basically you're gonna always kind of remember it.
And you should, right? When people say, why would you forget something like that, right?
Yeah.
Who wants to forget something like that? Because, they may be concerned it's going to happen again. So we're not necessarily trying to forget that it happened, but we do want to heal. We want to get to the point where we are less hyper aroused when we talk about it. We're less accusatory as time goes on, that we're able to sit back and have conversations about who this person was and work on our relationship, not only rebuilding trust, redefining the relationship and reclaiming a healthy relationship and sex life with one another, but also understanding what some issues that were present that led to the infidelity.
Yeah.
Right? So we know that everyone has power of choice to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
But we cannot sit back and ignore that there are some components or factors that may have led to that person doing what they did, right?
Yeah.
Now, some people like to call it reasons. Some people like to call it excuses. I like to look at it as me gaining insight on on everything that was impacting the relationship, right?
Yeah.
And it's not to say the hurt person or the person who was cheated on was at fault or did anything wrong, or we're trying to make the other person less guilty because we're pointing fingers. But we do need context. And the reason why we need context is so that way we know what to address as we're working on healing and to try to decrease the likelihood of it happening again.
Yeah. So would you say that to a certain point that, I guess, ongoing issues that exist in a relationship could cause a person to do whatever form of whatever that form of infidelity looks like? Do you think that ongoing issues could be one of those things that pushes people to kind of do something like that?
Absolutely. People justify all types of things all the time, right? So the thing that is typically missing again is conversation.
Yeah.
And if, say, for example, I was working with a couple who, for the person who stepped outside of the relationship, they weren't married, but stepped outside of the relationship, they said, I did that because you weren't having sex with me. Yeah. So what am I supposed to do? Right. And so the other partner was just feeling betrayed. Right. They said they knew that that's how their partner was feeling. They also felt guilty. They felt a lot of self-blame because what's wrong with me? What's going on with my sex drive? Right. Yeah. But the conversation stopped. And along with the conversation stopping, so did the intimacy. So did having conversations about other things not related to sex in the relationship. Just keeping up with one another and staying in tune with each other's lives, right? So we know that when it comes to sexual arousal and desire, it's not just, kiss me here, lick there, speak dirty to me for 30 seconds and boom, bam, I'm ready to go, right? Yeah. Intimacy consistently through communication, through touch, through vulnerability will build into that sexual response for a lot of people. Yeah. And so if you are feeling resentful towards your partner because they're not having sex with you and you cut off communication, you cut off vulnerability, you cut off intimacy, you give them the cold shoulder, you have that energy where it's just like, oh, I'm so annoyed with you. Yeah. And that's not going to help them want to sleep with you. Yeah. Right? That's going to make them give you back that same energy. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so we don't see it like that because there's a lot of entitlement sometimes, even though no one's talking. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it plays out a little bit. But you have to understand a lot of times that it's not just about sex, even when it is, it's not just about sex. Right. Yeah. Because you have to look at some of the issues that might be causing or impacting sex life. And at this, not just like infidelity. What about just lack of sex, a decrease in sex, right? Yeah. So it really depends on the reason. Is there a perceived performance issue, right? That might lead to shame and embarrassment, blaming the other person. Oh, you gained weight, so now I'm having a hard time with erections, right? Yeah. Is it because changes in attraction? Yeah. Are you exploring or questioning your own sexuality, right? Are there things going on with your mental and physical wellness that might be impacting your drive, your desire, and your performance, such as erection and self-lubrication? Yeah. And so, again, with all these things going on, there will likely be changes in the depth of communication, changes in transparency and honesty, intimacy and closeness. There may be resentment and anger. There may be false sense of obligation and duty. Yeah. Right? All the while, no communication. Yeah. And this assumption that, well, what time? Time heals. No, action does. And it may take time, but just time itself isn't going to get you where you want to go. And that's facts.
Yeah, you're right. You're definitely right about that. I mean, I think that you're right. I think everything goes hand in hand with how you vocalize that topic and everything centered around that. Because to me, I think it's easier for an individual, like I said, to talk about everything else to a certain extent, except that part, because again, that taps into your more vulnerable side.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was working with a couple who was experiencing something similar in terms of decreased sex, and some of the blame was put on the other partner, right? Well, you know, you changed and you gained weight and you don't dress like this anymore. And they're putting all the blame onto them of why they were having a hard time with erection. And we were having conversations about what is your sex life? What is your sexual desire and exploration outside of penetration, right? So often we stick into this frame that sex is penis and vagina, right? Foreplay is before sex and it's like 3 minutes long, if that, right? And then sex ends when someone climaxes or reaches orgasm, and then we're done, right? But sex is so much more than that. And I really work with couples on exploring their interests and their desire to explore what sex is outside of that. And it's so important to have this conversation because, one, our bodies will not always work in the way that we want them to, period. We are going to experience changes due to health, due to age, due to environmental factors, whatever the case is. So if we get really good at having conversations about sex and exploring sex, now, when we do have those type of experiences, it's not going to be like, oh, our sex life is just done with. We can't have sex anymore because we're used to having sex in this one specific way, right? So get really curious and explore your body and figure out what feels good and play around, you know? So, and usually like having that conversation sparks a lot of energy for folks because it takes off pressure. Because when you only have one way to do something and you think it's supposed to, you know, lead to this like amazing orgasm every single time, there's so much pressure there. And then you have performance pressure, you have anxiety, right? And then your body is not going to respond the way that you want because it's not full of pressure. It's full of thoughts and preconceptions and anxiety. And it's going to do the exact opposite of what you want it to do. So that kind of like having this conversation is helpful in validation, but also giving folks permission that they can look at this in a different way that can be more affirming to their body and their desires.
Yeah. So I think that you're right. Like you're spot on. I think initially once people get past what I call the sticker shock, to a certain extent, then everything just kind of opens up because, like I said, when you say the word sex, it's sticker shock. You know, they look at you like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe that this is the topic that we're talking about.
Yeah, like, you are so right. I say and put everywhere that I'm a sex, relationship, and trauma therapist, right? Yeah. And I remember this doesn't happen as much anymore. Yeah. But I remember I used to have clients who they'd come in and, I'm doing the assessment and I'm, trying to figure out what's going on, what they want to see me for. Yeah. And they'll tell me one thing and I'm putting the pieces together. I'm like, you're here for sex. You're here for sex. But they just weren't ready to say it out loud, or they were kind of skirting around the issues like, oh, well, me and my partner stress and I've been having questions about like desire, but I'm really stressed at work and I'm just anxious about all this other stuff. And then I'm like, by the second session, I'm like, look, I'm adding up the math and I'm wanting to know what's your relationship, because I always do like sexual history assessments with everyone too, because sex is such an integral part of our life, regardless if you are and especially if you are asexual or celibate, or if you have a polyamorous relationship, or if you're single, whatever the case is, that's still your sexual identity, right? And so I'm always asking those type of questions to let them know that I am able to have that conversation with them, because so often, and even in the medical field, like people have questions about sexual functioning, sexual concerns, but they are hesitant to bring it up with their medical doctor. Right? And so I like to be the one to introduce it, just to remind them, this is what I specialize in. I'm going to take care of you. We're going to create a safe space for conversation, to let them know that they can take their time, right? Yeah. And then we can get to work, right? So I'm not here to rush you. but I
Yeah.
want you to know that I'm here to support you.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
then you shock them with the sex talk. So yeah,
Oh, that is all part of the sex talk. It is. Just let them know. Just let them know.
Yeah. So if communication, that's something we've been talking about is communication. So if communication is like one of those building blocks for like a great relationship or a good relationship to a certain extent,
Mhm.
what other attributes would you say that are also good building blocks for like a healthy relationship plus like I guess outside of communication? Like what else needs to be there?
Perfect. I would say in addition, like that goes along with communication first is just to know when to have conversations about the hard things,
Okay.
which it's part timing, but it's also not waiting, weeks and months to have conversations, right? So don't let things stew. But
Yeah.
after you get past that, definitely building and prioritizing intimacy outside of sex,
Yeah.
creating safety in the relationship, right? So, what
Mhm.
have been those barriers around communication? Is there the use of, criticism and critique and shaming? Is there belittling and like what's happening that may make it difficult for me to come to my partner and have a conversation?
Yeah.
Finding out what makes me feel more safe and what makes my partner feel more safe to have these conversations. That's really important. Prioritizing time together and alone, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then being curious about your partner's day to day, being curious about their life and not making assumptions. So I'm a Gottman relationship therapist. And
Mhm.
so a word that we like to talk about is like the roadmap, the couple's roadmap and the individual roadmap. And so to always be curious about what your partner has going on. Sometimes I see in relationships, people just lose interest or they just make assumptions about their partner, right? And
Mhm.
so I like to use the analogy, well, not the analogy, I was working with a woman who, no, this wasn't couples therapy, it was just individual. And she was just complaining because her husband kept buying her flowers that she didn't like, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, I love flowers. And, I used to like these flowers, but I don't like them anymore. And, if I tell him that I don't like him, he's just going to stop. He's just never going to buy me flowers again. He's going to be embarrassed. He's going to be mad. And so I just have to put up with these flowers that I don't like.
Yeah.
Right. And
Mhm.
so it's, we had a conversation about the story she was telling in her mind.
Yeah.
Right. Well, if I bring up something I'm not happy with or I want him to change, he's going to be mad at me and he's going to punish me by not ever buying me flowers again. Where did this message come from?
Yeah.
Has this ever happened in your relationship? No. Okay. Right. So it's an internalized and it's projected onto your partner. Right.
Mhm.
But in the same token, on the partner's end, he was moving off of maybe some old data for the
Yeah.
relationship. He knew that she liked this flower at one point, but there hadn't been
Mhm.
any check-ins about how she liked the flowers. Had she grown to like any other type of flowers? And so that was an example of the roadmap. Sometimes we are operating off of old information and we need to check in and update. It's kind of like if you're using Google Maps, you want to update it. Well, Google
Yeah.
Maps kind of updates itself, but
Yeah.
you want to make sure that there's nothing new that's popped up, new roads, new buildings, new places to
Mhm.
eat, and check in with your partner and find out what are some things that I may have tuned out or not have been curious about. So I think
Yeah.
that's something that can also just keep it spicy and keep it fun, that you're not making assumptions about one another.
Yeah. So when I guess two individuals come to you and you do your assessment and you check on them and you just do your evaluation on them, and one or the other person has an issue like with like confidence, right? Like self-confidence and self-esteem to a
Mhm.
certain extent. Like what is your go-to for like telling them what to do in that area?
Mm, I like this question. So, something that I would actually talk about is self trust.
Okay.
So, self trust is, the reliance on yourself, but also it's about integrity with yourself, right? Am I doing what I say I'm going to do, right? It's trust that you're able to make it through and survive certain situations, that, you practice what you preach, that you're kind, but also recognizing that you're not perfect, right?
Yeah.
It means refusing to give up on yourself, challenging your inner critic, right?
Yeah.
Looking at facts over feelings, right?
Okay.
Because we're really good at noticing the bad, and we struggle sometimes to consider the good. And I don't like to stay in good and bad behaviors, but I would like to recognize it because sometimes we put ourselves in those type of boxes.
Yeah.
Um, and it's all about finding balance. So the reason why I think it's important to talk about self-trust is because we get really good at not listening to ourselves in a lot of situations, right? We're saying yes to things we don't want to say yes to, right? We're not
Yeah.
saying no as often as we need to for our own emotional and physical well-being.
Yeah.
Um, we are prioritizing other needs over even just like our physiological needs, like going to the bathroom and taking a break to eat. Oh no, I gotta finish this. Let me work 30 more minutes and then I'm gonna go to the bathroom. Work. Let me work another hour and I'm gonna take a lunch break, right?
Yeah.
That's an
Mhm.
example of not listening to yourself, right? So that's gonna feed a
Yeah.
message to your brain that you're not trusting yourself or you're not trustworthy. So I think
Yeah.
slowing down to work on self-trust in that capacity has always been really monumental in some of the work that I do, be it trauma survivors, be it relationship concerns, be it sexuality concerns. Because if we're not listening to ourselves, we're not trusting ourselves, it's hard to kind of engage with other people, or we might project that into other people, right? If I'm not
Yeah.
trusting myself, what the heck I'm going to trust someone else for, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it looks like setting boundaries, again, doing what you say you'll do, and speaking kindly to yourself, being gracious and compassionate with yourself. So yeah, hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. But I guess from a relationship standpoint, I guess it just would be important to maintain your identity, right? Like who you
Mm-hmm.
are as a individual operating inside of a relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means like just making sure that, that person is, doing things for themselves to a certain extent, like whatever they choose to make them happy, making sure that they maintain those things so that they can feel comfortable as an individual, which makes them comfortable in their relationship, right?
Absolutely, because being in a relationship is not about losing yourself or giving up everything and changing who you are, right?
Yeah.
That will lead to being angry, resentful, and having anxiety about having to keep up this front, or anxiety about when can you get your needs met, right?
Yeah.
Or feeling like the person owes you something because you did all this stuff for them and they haven't done anything for you, right?
Yeah.
But also, remind yourself, who did the person fall for? Who did they like? So why are
Yeah.
we changing it, right?
Yeah.
Be yourself, maintain your interest and your friendships, right? Have boundaries. And it kind of goes back to just talking about the need to engage in activities that feel good to you, your hobbies, your interests, right?
Mhm.
And then also, you're just not up under each other all the time. Give each other
Yeah.
some space. And I think it's really important because unfortunately, this is really common where either if someone is single, they have no support, right? They don't have people to turn to. And they may find themselves being into relationships so that they have a community, right? Or they get into a relationship and they lose contact with their other support people or their friends because they're prioritizing the romantic and sexual relationship. And unfortunately, in our society, and in a lot of societies and cultures, to be honest, that is a message that your most important relationship is your sexual romantic one, right?
Yeah.
I personally believe that the most important relationship you have is with yourself,
Mhm.
right? Treating yourself well, trusting self-trust, doing
Yeah.
things that feel good to you. Because when you are well taken care of by yourself, then you can work on exploring and sharing with another partner.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's immensely important um, to continue to be an individual and prioritize yourself in that way, and it's going to benefit your relationship 100 times over.
Yeah, it is because I guess it's that old saying you can't really, make others happy if you're not happy yourself.
Right. Yeah, there is a saying of like, you can't love you wait, how do you expect to be loved if you can't love yourself type of thing, which
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of that because in actuality, People who struggle to love themselves are typically well loved by others. But sometimes it's hard for them to read it, see it, or even accept it, that people can love me when I'm struggling with loving myself. But yeah, I just like to say that because so often we have this idea that you don't just, it can sound like you don't deserve love until you love yourself. And that's not true. One of the great ways to learn about love is in relationship to other people, what it looks like, learning how to set boundaries, right? If you're isolated all the time, you never get that chance or opportunity to kind of test yourself, right?
Yeah.
If I have boundaries and no one ever tries to cross it, how do I know if I can uphold it? So sometimes we need some of these relationships to make sure we're staying on our toes.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I guess that's one of those points where you always want to feel challenged to a certain extent, and I guess mentally challenged to a certain extent for that growth, right?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt, right?
No, it never hurts. Never hurts.
You don't want, I mean, not necessarily want like a battle every single day, but something that is kind of keeping you interested and keeping you true to yourself.
So, last question for you. So, what motivates you to be the best version of yourself daily? Like, what motivates you every day to get up and just do the very best you can?
Yeah. Interesting question. You know, actually, I don't think in being a better version of myself every day.
Okay.
I might think of that sometimes, but mostly I reflect on what does or does not align with my goals and values.
Okay.
I stay gracious and giving to myself. I try to be patient. I try to be curious and understanding. I talk to myself a lot, so I always try to seek balance by reaching out to some friends.
Yeah.
Make sure, you know, that added perspective can be very helpful.
Yeah.
And then there are days when I feel like my day was a wash. I might feel disappointed in myself or a way that I behave. But all of that is part of how you get better, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like what I said before, if there's nothing to improve on, what am I doing, right? Got to stay humble. But no, seriously, one of my life philosophies centers not falling into grind culture, prioritizing myself, and always making time for pleasure and fun. And the other one is do no harm to others. So I'm very conscious about how my actions may impact others. And I'm very intentional about checking myself, asking questions, apologizing to minimize harm, listening to people who said I've done something that hurt their feelings and rectifying that. And so I would say those things to me is more of a daily intentionality or daily practice as opposed to being a best version of me. Because, you know, if that's the case, it's like every day I'm a new version. But yeah, so that's kind of how I like to go through my day. But honestly, some days it's just, listen, we're going to eat, we're going to feed yourself, you're going to shower yourself, and you are going to sleep or watch TV. You're going to do one thing. And that's okay, even though in my head I might feel like, oh, I'm so behind.
Yeah.
So it's that balancing for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I mean, to a point, that's almost like embracing your individuality to a certain extent and just enjoying who you are.
Absolutely. Through all of it. Of it.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're basically describing, and that's a beautiful thing. Like it is, like when a person gets to that point where, you know, they truly enjoy what they do and they love helping people and they're embracing themselves as an individual, then you can do great work on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it is, I mean, as a therapist and you know, as a coach, you know how much work it takes of self for being more aware, for staying curious, but also to be real with ourselves as helping professionals, right?
Yeah.
So it's not this idea that, you know, we have to know everything all the time. I think similar to you, you know, I've been in the helping profession for a while in different capacities from an early age, right? But also just recognizing some pressure, right? Oh, I'm a sex therapist. I should be doing this. I'm a relationship therapist. My relationship should be perfect. I'm a therapist in general. Like I shouldn't be anxious and depressed. That's not how the world works,
It's
right?
not.
And anyone who tries to push that on me, I stop taking it personally. Like, that's your projection. I don't know what you have going on. We can talk about it, but I'm not going to burden myself with trying to live up to an expectation that is not attainable,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think sometimes we can be a little hard on ourselves, but it is all about that balance and figuring out what are your own morals and values and which actions, behaviors push you towards them and which ones might pull you away from them. And sometimes you will be going back and forth, but to have that awareness first is where you can start making some change.
Yeah. So, Rafaella, thank you for joining the conversation. I'm glad you took some time out of your day to